Anyone who knows video games knows that games are one of life's greatest sources of fun. But because games require something called skill, what can be seen as one player's enjoyment may often end up, regrettably, as just another's frustration. In today's gaming climate, we hear terms such as skill issue quite often, both as a direct diss towards someone's ability on the controller or keyboard, and as a sarcastic remark used to refute a person's viewpoint over a difference in gaming preferences. In the old days, the more skeptical, salty gamers would cry, "bullshit," when things didn't go our way in a competitive setting, or more specifically, when someone sat down to play a Team Ninja game and saw that they had to fight Alma Greater Fiend, knowing well that they wouldn't be able to land a single hit unless the game was feeling generous with the wonky camera placement and the hitbox alignment in a particular frame. I had always wondered why, as a fan of the genre ever since Devil May Cry 3, which is a game that I beat in 2005 at the age of 7 years old with no pubes, by the way, accomplishing what most grown men couldn't dare to attempt, let alone achieve. Why did I never get around to the other game of a similar caliber at the same time and place? Simple. I just didn't own an Xbox, saving me from agony and exhilaration. After seeing what Ninja Gaiden is made of, I almost wish I did play Xbox back in the day. Coincidentally, 20 years later, this action game veteran finally got around to the legendary, infamous, and unrelenting Ninja Gaiden franchise. Perhaps the best Xbox game ever made, depending on what version you play. And I learned a valuable lesson for games and life. A message straight from the sadistic developers themselves. Never give up. I never do, and that's how I became a Master Ninja Sigma male gamer in only 150 hours, with nothing but skill, sweat, and a life-shortening spike in my blood pressure. The Ninja Gaiden Master Collection earns its marketing title because it demands that you master it. Having a game tell you straight out that there is no such thing as too hard is as much a sign of humorous contempt as it is a challenge encouraging the player to push themselves to the limits of not only their patience, but their creativity. Challenging is good, at least when the challenge teaches you something about the nature of the game and about yourself, your own personal character and integrity. A test of willpower that is difficult by design, and not just because of sadistic tendency toward imposing a meaningless attrition and grind. It's the way that I felt about Nioh, my favorite Team Ninja game and one of my favorite games of all time. A game I loved more and more as I learned to get better and more patient through trial and error. The right way, through stubborn will, instead of relying on my intuition, because after all, no matter how well rehearsed you are for a game or life itself, there will always be RNG that can fuck you over. So you have to stay prepared and stay vigilant. Never giving up, never surrendering. It's a message often attributed in modern times to the Souls games, but one that truly originated during an earlier time period in gaming history, when games were brutal without a cause, because they didn't know what else to be. Although, in fairness, I do believe that older action games were paradoxically more strategic in their designs, deeper in their tool bags than many games today. Those games that wish to water everything in their narratives and their controls down in order to coddle the player in service of accessibility. Games are meant to be fun, but they are not meant to be free, like participation trophies. Like any test, they ask you tough questions that only you can answer by studying hard and putting in the work yourself. The great thing about the internet is that we can cheat a little by sharing our strategies with one another, like the sensei JTB123, who helped me and others out tremendously with his many expert guides for this 20-year-old classic. It's a great service to the community as a whole to continue making walkthroughs for a game that's so intimidating that most people would never look, let alone touch it. If I'm making it sound harder than it is, I might as well be embellishing a bit. But it's hard to know since everything is made more simple thanks to YouTube video guides in the current day and age. It's monkey see, monkey do now. When I was growing up, playing games like DMC3 and RE4, there were no video walkthroughs spilling all the secrets, one clip at a time. The best we had was game facts to share pointers to help each other in the right direction. Nostalgic. Knowledge is the first key to unlocking intelligence, but understanding isn't something you can acquire without experience. What can't be disputed is you still have to persevere on your own, because looks can deceive and what someone else may be able to pull off with relative ease is only the result of practice and not for the faint of heart. With the release of a game like Stellar Blade bringing a much needed spotlight to the hack and slash genre, and fingers crossed maybe a sort of renaissance, coupled with other copycat games like Team Ninja's own Rise of the Ronin, doing its best Ghost of Tsushima impression instead of its best Nioh 3 impression, I thought I'd just return to the source point to learn from the best of the best what makes an action game truly sharp. Understanding the complexity of character action games leads us to the greatest experiences one may ever find in gaming, and for the same reasons we may also understand why action games have remained so niche. Unlike JRPGs, action games don't take prisoners. You will fail a lot, early and often, and it's only up to you to get better through determination and the satisfaction with self-improvement. Take Ninja Gaiden for example. I first started the game on Hero mode, which is essentially baby mode, even more so than the hilarious Ninja Dog mode, which is the definition of the polar opposite of difficulty. By the time I got to hard and very hard, I noticed a considerable jump, mostly because I was just beginning to actually play the game at this point. Getting better at a game means pushing yourself beyond the typical threshold into darker territory. It's Devil May Cry's signature and unparalleled Dante Must Die mode, Bayonetta's non-stop infinite climax, and Ninja Gaiden's Master Ninja, or Neo's Dream of the Neo. Overcoming these modes is a stepping stone with a steep curve. Who you will be by the end, and what you've earned at that point, going from barely scraping by on autopilot to becoming the very boss at that end of the tunnel, will be the contrast that makes the journey worthwhile. The journey that action games have taken from their start at the arcade to the comfort of our own homes, from button mashing to sophisticated styling, is very much relevant in understanding why Ninja Gaiden became, and still is, one of the most innovative games, and one of the Triple Crown games in the action genre. Action games take a lot out of the player, but never more than they return to the player through the platform of personal expression. Action games are known to have one of the highest possible skill ceilings available due to the intricacies of the systems designed to facilitate player choice and variety, and the need for not just pattern memorization and muscle memory, but split-second reaction times and an innate knowledge of deeper mechanical terms like iframes and recovery frames and the relationship between them. It's the core nature of fighting games, the very first competitive avenue gamers crossed into historically, to exploit not just enemy weaknesses like turn-based games ask you to do, but to exploit openings, holes in your enemy's offense for which you can launch a counterattack into a complete combo string of your own. None of this pitter-patter bullshit like the Souls games have you do, where you get one good hit in only after parrying 10 attacks in a row, or waiting an hour for the big wind-up move to slide behind the enemy safely for damage. There's a little bit of that in Gaiden too, but you get to play with tempo more often than not. The design philosophy is to kill everything with prejudice in as timely a manner as possible. It's not about killing time as much as it is kill in time for the karma bonuses, where everything you do in that specific allotment is how you generate points and maintain momentum. It is strange for the timer not to count down and just give you the time bonus immediately unless the enemy despawns, yet in Eternal Legend the bonus is instant. You have to be extra precise. Where Devil May Cry and Bayonetta are about pulverizing your enemies like punching bags and looking cooler with every subsequent combo, Ninja Gaiden is about survival and efficiency, using everything from the bare essentials to the ultimate techniques. They all share similar characteristics in terms of ranking the performance of the player, with time, orbs, style points, and damage being converted into time, essence, karma, and even though you don't get directly scored on damage taken, staying alive as Ryu will be probably more strenuous than as Dante. So just making it to the end of the chapter, or hell, even to the next save checkpoint, is a sure sign that you know what you're doing. There's a great indication of this during the very first encounter in the very first level, one of the hardest opening stanzas in any game, period. Ninja Gaiden gives you mixed signals, on one hand telling you to never give up, and on the other, showing you the sad state of the slain shinobis that weren't made for surviving this world. Ryu pities him for his own lack of survival instincts. He was not long for this world to begin with. Let's protect yourself at all times in the world of Gaiden. Or you can be like this guy and kill yourself out of fear of Ryu Hayabusa. I said a while ago that Stellar Blade and even Sekiro get parries wrong because a parry in an action game is actually designed to be more of an in-between move rather than a defensive measure to wither down the enemy guard. Sure, a parry can guard break the opponent, but it should be swift and instant with proper responsiveness, with the assuredness that when the parry succeeds, you get to launch some follow-up damage to punish. The Electric Underground has a much deeper explanation in his analysis of Metal Gear Rising, but I happen to concur with his basic premise that parries are kind of arbitrary in modern design, and a more subtle approach is necessary if you want to keep the player invested in a seamless action experience. More important than the parry is the spacing game, and modern games today take away spacing from the player, whereas in old games, closing the distance was not as much of a given as it was a necessary tactic involving micromanagement in advance. Ninja Gaiden succeeded so well in 2004 because it retained a lot of the core DNA from fighting games and converted the philosophies into 3D hack and slash. The spacing between you and your enemies is of paramount importance because spacing determines the hitbox and even the variety of attack you can expect to prepare for. In Ninja Gaiden, you get too far away from a projectile enemy, you'll get projectile spam blasted off screen into submission. On the flip side, if you get too close, then you can get grabbed and one-shot just the same, tossed around like a salad even. Finding the middle ground allows you to bait enemy attacks and exploit recovery frames for guaranteed punishers. Lure enemies into running straight into you and you'll decapitate them with a well-timed flying swallow, assuming the auto-aim is in your favor. In what is perhaps one of the most brilliant examples of incorporating level design into combat design, Ninja Gaiden has a hidden mechanic surrounding chaining the resource from dead enemies from one another to the next in quick succession in order to charge the super moves and decimate enemies from their very spawn point. Upon killing an enemy, it is a certainty that they will drop yellow, red, or blue essence orbs, which can be collected outright for upgrades and health, or left behind to gather with the force of Nimpo gravity at the proper timing to fuel an instant ET or UT and wipe the wave. Being aware at all times of what enemies are spawning in and where you've killed the last batch leads you into your next chess move on the battlefield. Understanding that you can leave essence behind, even a few rooms away from the next encounter, and then harness it to your advantage is vital in determining whether you'll be able to cheese with tempo or end up as great at cheese. I think it's great that every enemy has a guaranteed drop with some RNG as to whether it's health, money, or Nimpo, and it's really interesting that you can use the environment and unique situations tied to it to your advantage. It's just too bad that you can't get Ryu to reliably aim at what you want him to. At the same time, I think a large part of the game's higher demand centers on abusing the UT system, which serves to simplify the experience if not trivialize it somewhat. Again, spacing is always important because even with the ability to charge UTs by absorbing essence, the enemy can always interrupt the flow if you're not careful. And besides, it's not any worse than if you were to spam flying swallows or Izuna drops, though each one of those moves has recovery frame trade-offs. I suppose also relying on Devil Trigger Explosion is the same concept, though DTE has to be fueled and charged slowly by killing enemies and gaining style points. Still, it's a unique idea to Gaiden and yet another example of how the spacing game is everything. Another principle of action game design is camera manipulation and keeping enemies off screen in order to pacify them, allowing you to charge up your big time moves at your discretion. Unfortunately, Ninja Gaiden's camera has a mind of its own, often flying off the handle, backing you into corners and getting you killed. At times, it's downright atrocious, but also there's never been a camera quite like it. The variable zooms match the intensity of the close quarters melee, and occasionally they zoom out to give a wide lens of the mayhem, putting more pressure on you to keep your focus, almost like you're being watched. Really, you're watching yourself in anguish and hoping that you don't make a crucial mistake with a wrong input here or a wrong move there. To the extent that you can manipulate the camera, the lock-on cannot be controlled much at all, leading to some excruciating fuck-ups. It's even worse that the game forces you into close quarters ninja parkour and wall running, which is especially useful for scavenging the hidden items that flesh out exploration in this diverse world, from rural Japan to Egypt to the netherworld and beyond. Having to center the camera and also deal with the proper timing on jumps is a nuisance that took getting used to, and it was even more troublesome with the stick drift taking effect. Still, I enjoy the fact that each level has replayability and unique item locations and enemy encounters depending on the difficulty. The game looks great too, especially for a 2004 game, with some noticeable changes in the particle effects and the color palette from the black version. The levels are long, packed with enemies and hidden challenges worth exploring for, both for the experience in battle and the earned rewards. Though there is a significant portion of backtracking through the levels, there's typically always a new enemy encounter or an old one to farm for resources that might surprise you, making the world feel alive and full. There's quite a bit of deduction and problem solving here as well, though much of the puzzles were scaled back for Sigma, streamlining the combat experience, which is an improvement always and forever over the laborious fetch quest and the like. After all, I've always said that the strength of a game's design is that the combat itself is a puzzle, figuring out how to fight each enemy of a kind and then multiple kinds in a blender. I'll take the level design of a game like Ninja Gaiden any day over modern accessibility with yellow paint versus the cleverly hidden parkour that rewards you for your intuition and curiosity. Ninja Gaiden is claustrophobic with hordes of swarming enemies, whereas Devil May Cry 3 has more spacing for teleporting and styling, skateboarding on enemies, and of course the lock-on that solves most of the troublesome camera that can't decide where to look or who to target. At the same time, the combat in Ninja Gaiden is almost weightless, about as fluid as it gets, with little tricks in the movement like wall attacks and wind run, akin to Devil May Cry enemy step. The flying swallow, your projectiles, and little ninja rolls and ninja flips, the kind of freestyle dance that Ghost of Sushi was, without the deeper moveset or enemy variety of a Ninja Gaiden. There's a surprisingly satisfactory selection of weapons and a robust progression system for each one of them. The starting weapon ends up being one of the strongest and most practical, though many of Ryu's techniques can be chained across multiple weapons. There are many possibilities for matching swords to bosses, room for experimentation and improv around every corner. The main distinction among them is between light and heavy. The light weapons have innumerable combo strings that can be chained into multiple nearby enemies, best for mobility. The heavy weapons hit like a truck and have a crushing effect with area of effect attacks, and the unlabored flawlessness has a hidden trait of doing a damage multiplier specifically on flashing red health, giving you an extra risk and reward style of play.
Ooh! I fucking nuked him.
The Katetsu lets you steal health. In the hands of the right player, any one of these tools could be an all-purpose weapon, but the game is designed with enough balance that certain strats may be easier to execute than others depending on the circumstances, especially when you get to the trial rooms where you're often given a small selection to work within the constraints. My only primary complaint is that you can't switch skills automatically like you can in Devil May Cry with weapon and gun switching and later style switching. One of the things that Sigma adds that's very useful is the ability to use items instantly with the press of the D-pad. This is crucial as it allows you to heal in a pinch, and even heal upon what would otherwise be death, by refilling the health bar completely at the right time of an attack landing. In other games, you'd simply be locked into animations, but here you can heal through them and spam buttons to get out of them faster. You can combine various equipment, unlock through progression through the difficulties to modify various aspects of the game's systems to break the game further, almost like light RPG elements. It's much appreciated to be able to use the Grip of Murder costume on higher difficulties, as not to turn the game into a sponge fest, even with the 120 enemy counts and the Fiend challenges that are bad enough as it is. There's hardly a distinction between the very hard mode and Master Ninja, other than scaling, unlike the Devil May Cry Dante Must Die mode, which gives you Devil Trigger enemies that you have to strategize against, as every third enemy will Devil Trigger after the first two have been killed. Both action games are the same in that they divide encounters into waves, and the waves into locked rooms. But Devil May Cry lets you play with your food, whereas Ryu is a hungry boy that wants to devour all of the essence in sight. There's also an absence of aerial combat or defensive play, which is a bit disappointing. Being able to manipulate enemies through wall jumps is your best bet to throw them off outside of the perfect parries and knowing when to roll, or interrupting their spam with some of your own. There's a surprising amount of nuance in the lesser ninja design, with each ninja having a different health gauge, damage output, and weapons. The red ninjas put you on fire with incendiary blades and shurikens. The Vigorian ninjas are weak, but they have the speed of the windmill shurikens at their disposal. The Berserker fiends are built like tanks, but those with a keen eye and a soft touch can parry them at will. The boss design is a little more hit or miss here. There's a few bosses that are essentially repurposed from one to the next, and some of them only become difficult to fight because of the presence of minions on the higher modes. And even this is kind of more of a gift to the player, because they can drop health and essence that can be chained into UTs against the boss. For every Doku fight, there is a Hydra Cubus fight, or an Awakened Alma, one of the most bullshit and frustrating bosses that I've ever seen. As much as DMC fans like to give 3 shit for the Arkham fight, which I know is nobody's favorite blue blob of shit, he's a far more dynamic and competent design than some of the bosses here in Ninja Gaiden, and you get to fight him alongside Virgil, which is more than compensation for him constantly teleporting away. Try fighting Nishe and Ishtaros with Rachel and tell me you think this game is more fun. I'm gonna have to be an Arkham apologist here, which I know will make a lot of you scratch your heads, but this is coming from someone who did get the SS rank on Mission 19 more than once, which means I have more than enough experience with how annoying Arkham can be, and he still isn't as bad as Alma, unless you get the right RNG on her and put her away quickly. Arkham at least gives you always guaranteed hits throughout the fight, The bosses in Ninja Gaiden kind of betray the very design philosophy that action games are going for, and that the regular combat nails down to perfection. A great number of these bosses, including Alma and her 3 variants, spam their attacks indefinitely, offering scarcely a window for a direct counter, or Mirai, who has the same impenetrable defense, save only for the brief window when you can hit him through a dodge roll, which is also how you can take damage as well. Instead of punishing recovery frames like normal, you have to rely on the hitbox actually registering, and use bullshit tactics like wall jumps to hit through their attacks, and that's only if and when Ryu can actually lock onto something. Then you get the clones, which literally cheat against you by blocking and attacking simultaneously. And I wonder if my struggles are due to that skill difference, or if this switch up actually complements the difficulty nicely. I mean, I first thought Ishtaro's was pure bullshit, until I kind of figured out how to bait her attacks and expertly dodge behind her. But again, the camera and the lack of a lock-on can fuck you at any time, even with a lifetime of preparation going in. One of my rules for game design is the game should never put you in a position you can intelligently defend against or circumvent. Perfect play means playing almost like a fool in this game against certain bosses. If you know, then you know. I know some of it is just the developers having a laugh with us, but the lack of consistent hitboxes in certain fights is just bullshit and painful. And this inconsistency is why Ninja Gaiden is not quite a masterpiece. It doesn't make me disregard the game completely, but in these particular aspects, with no manual lock-on and only a limited camera control, we have occasionally difficulty by bullshit more than by design. But I still love the game anyway, and it is astonishing, breathtaking, rage-inducing, and oh so satisfying and addicting. The pure DNA of action games that no one born after the late 90s could understand unless they stumbled upon these games, in retrospect, at the recommendation of gaming YouTubers like myself, JTB, and the other veterans of these gems. Ninja Gaiden is somewhat limiting and sometimes simplified compared to Devil May Cry and Bayonetta. For example, with how there is no penalty towards the combo meter for spamming the same moves, other than the potential downside to recovery frames. But that's not saying much, as those are the absolute peaks of the genre, and of games in general. What is available to you in Ninja Gaiden is a great deal of utility, with an emphasis on destruction, with little to no time spared on the clock. Ninja Gaiden suffers from frustrating design choices, or more accurately, design quirks, and the fact that no definitive version exists, which is a problem for the entire series it seems. Yet, through the frustration, the brilliance and the exhilaration of the arcade-style slasher combat transcends the annoyance of the flimsy camera and the menu swapping. I believe also the gameplay is above all, and Ninja Gaiden has near perfect design in all important aspects, although no one is going to give the game special dues for the characters or the story. Still, the cutscenes are pretty stylish and even goofy in a sort of charming way, and in terms of how imposing each of the heroes and villains are in the gameplay, I think it's fair enough for me to give it all a passing score as to not drag down the score in totality. It's not perfect like DMC3 or RE4, but it's damn close. The soundtrack is pretty solid as well. Not masterpiece tier, but you have some good shit here. Like the minimalism of the drums and the OST of the first mission, giving you that intensity, and the techno grunge and the zombie battle theme, which I quite like. The OST doesn't go quite as hard as the slashing does, but it's good where it counts, through one ear and out the other. One other component that I'm sort of split on is the lack of mission select in New Game Plus. You do have many difficulty settings, as well as mission mode, and I heard Black had some elements of New Game Plus. And of course, some people think Sigma is better for the fact that you have to start almost from scratch on each difficulty, showcasing more of your skill in each situation, more than your preparation. Because this game has so many different versions, I guess I can let it slide and give it a 10 out of 10 for replay value, because I don't see this base formula ever getting old. Just being able to boot up a survival mission or a save file to get back in the action is just what I need. That's also incredibly generous that you can save throughout any level. Imagine being able to save at a divinity statue anywhere in DMC3. It makes the game easier, but that's one aspect of accessibility I will gladly take. Simply amazing that a game from 2004 had this. When I was growing up, I knew nothing about Ninja Gaiden or Team Ninja. I grew up lucky to have Capcom and Devil May Cry, and I'll always stand by those games. I used to wonder what this Gaiden was that was rumored to be harder than DMC. I felt insecure about that at the time. It's a question that doesn't need to be answered definitively. After all, a lot of this is subjective in terms of skill and depending on how you choose to play. What is important is that both games are great, with freedom of choice and the potential suiting many types of plans of attacks. What matters is they are both pure in their design, uncompromising in their visions of what games can be, as sandboxes where we can make things happen on our own terms, within the parameters set by the masters and the sadists that love to see us struggle within their playpens. I've kind of answered the question for myself. It's a bit of a yes and a no. But like this user explained in this Reddit post, I feel that as action game fans, we are few and far between, and so we need to stick together, like the pillars of the West and the East. Like silent films, much of game design was codified during the arcade era where the original Ninja Gaiden was made, and the greats continue to use that DNA today. There's old, and then there's born yesterday, which is how a lot of the general gaming population acts, like when they go losing their minds over Stellar Blade. It's not as good as Souls, and Souls is not as good as Stellar Gaiden, a pure action game. Back then, I was Capcom, and I will always be. But now, I'm Team Ninja, and I'm Team Gaiden. Or better yet, Team Action Games.
My network of ninja.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Lineage. And now, the dragon sword is gripped firmly in the hands of young ninja Ryu Hayabusa.